The 2023 Coachella Festival was hotly anticipated for being the return to stage for Frank Ocean, an enigmatic artist who hadn't played shows in years. Whether or not he delivered on that hype was up to the viewer. I was there and I had a good time, but to each their own, I guess. But further down the lineup that year was another artist who, on the mysterious scale, makes Frank Ocean look like Taylor Swift. Sure, Frank had been quiet for a few years, but he's put on a couple tours in his lifetime and had officially released music in the past few years. Come on, remember Dear April? That's one of my favorite Frank songs. J. Paul, on the other hand, had never played a single show in his life, and the only full album he'd ever released was taken from his hands without his consent. So who is this guy whose name unfortunately kind of sounds like a certain YouTuber turned boxer, and thus, when you say his name correctly out loud, it's not Jai Paul, it's J. Paul. It makes people think you're saying Jake Paul, and then they look at you kind of funny when you ask if they listen to him. He might not be a household name, but you may have heard him within the works of other artists like Drake, Beyonce, Big Boy from Outkast, and Childish Gambino. And his influence has lived on far past his own music and bled into the way we see pop music today. Lorde, in 2015, tweeted that someone should start a J. Paul imitation fund and donate every time an indie pop bro puts out a song that rips him, #justice. And 2 years later, she herself was accused of ripping J. Paul on her song Homemade Dynamite, to the point where some people even questioned if J. Paul goes to produce the song. The truth is, when an artist as different as J. Paul catches steam, it can reset the whole meta of music making, and everything after it just kind of feels like a BC versus AD kind of situation. But before all that, Jay was a kid growing up along with his brother and fellow musician A.K. Paul in Rayners Lane, a suburb in northwestern London. His parents are from India, and Rayners Lane is a heavily Indian neighborhood. Famous British actor Dev Patel, who is also of Indian descent, grew up there too. I believe there is a phenomenon where the less information an artist gives us about themselves, the more likely their fans are going to dig as deeply as possible. And because J. Paul has probably given the world less than the bare minimum of what you would expect from an artist with his level of notoriety and popularity, especially one signed to a label, his fans have done an incredible job of archiving and organizing basically every time J. Paul has ever breathed. This iceberg meme says it all. People have figured out where he went to high school. But also because of this, it's impossible for me to summarize his career or even really talk about him in general without giving a huge thank you to the J. Paul online communities, especially these two big Reddit posts from the user Bubblegum Dog and the members of his thread on the forum Kanye to the or KTT. I usually like to form timelines about artists when I'm writing them and just kind of use a bunch of different sources, but because there's really not that much out there about Jay, everything is in this one post. And so I just want to say thank you so much, and in an act of journalistic integrity, be like, yo, I just really want to thank the Reddit and the KTT users for putting that all together. KTT is where I personally discovered Jay and a bunch of other cool artists back when I was in high school. But my goal in this video is not to just summarize his career, but to talk about why his work has been so influential on other artists in our generation, including myself. However, it's a hell of a story, so we're definitely going to just kind of go through it as well. But before we get into that, if you like videos on music like this one, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe. I try to post a video every week, and if you want to see them early, you can go to my Instagram, HADJI, throw me a follow on there, and then join my broadcast channel. In that channel, I post the videos one day early every time. If you have any suggestions for what other artists I should cover in this your artist favorite artist series I'm doing, definitely leave them in the comments. I have a couple ideas. I don't want to give them away yet, but throw them in the comments. Let's see what happens. And lastly, thanks for the love on my latest single, Was It Ever Really Like That? I really appreciate it. It's really cool getting to share my stuff with you guys as we talk about artists. If you want to check it out, I'll leave the link in the description. Also, it's the instrumental playing in the background, so if you like that, it'll give you an idea. All right, back to the video. Jay started posting music on MySpace in his late teens. In 2007, when he was 19, he recorded the first demo for his song BTSTU, which according to the internet stands for Back to Save the Universe. The demo didn't catch steam until almost 3 years later in 2010, when blogs got a hold of it and started going crazy over it. We would later find out that the only reason blogs heard it in the first place was that Jay's brother AK was so geeked when he first heard it that he pushed to have it sent out. The Fader posted about it in April of 2010, although what first caught their attention was the legendary cover art he had for it on MySpace. The cover art has since been broken down to insane detail in a Reddit thread. The Guardian posted about the song in May 2010, and at that point, they were already acknowledging that there was a lot of label and A&R attention on the kid. They compared it to Hudson Mohawk, Hot Chip, Jamie Liddell, and Prince. Here's a post from the random blog audiodrums.com from July 16th, 2010. Happy Friday, and it comes with a killer new track from J. Paul. This track starts off really quiet, so hang in there for about 15 seconds. He's got something unique. It's weird, somewhere in between Burial and Prince. Sort of dubstep, haunting vocals, really amazing. I think that kid's gonna end up being huge. I think it's the first or second thing he posted. It's pretty rare for an artist to completely reset the paradigm with one song. But if any song is gonna do that, it's BTS To You. It's such a unique sounding song, with the way it balances Jay's unbelievably soaring high falsetto with electronic production and this funk influence. Like a lot of Jay's work, you can hear the fingerprints of this song all over pop music in the 2010s, and more underground scenes like what was going on SoundCloud in the middle of that decade. The Guardian was correct in their insinuation that labels were after Jay. They specifically mentioned Polydor, which is a German-British imprint under Universal Music Group, and it has a lot of sway out there in the UK. It wasn't just them, it was also Warp Records, a British independent label with the likes of Aphex Twin, who is said to be one of Jay's personal favorites. A purported childhood friend of his named Solly made a YouTube video listing off a bunch of things about Jay from their experience in college together, before his music took off, and one of the things that he said was that he loved Aphex Twin. It's believable anyway just from listening to Jay. Another label with interest was XL Recordings, a British indie label with the likes of Adele and Radiohead. It was XL Recordings who ended up winning out, and they tweeted at the end of 2010, looking forward into 2011, the first 6 months will see XL albums from Adele, Gil and Jamie XX, Friendly Fires, J. Paul, and The Horrors. The Horrors were indeed in store for anyone who expected a J. Paul album in 2011, because we never got one. But there was an official release on XL Recordings of the BTS To You demo, titled BTS To You (Edit), close parentheses, and it was polished up and mastered by Jay's brother AK Paul, who also worked on some of the song's production and vocals. At this point, the hype had truly left the station. Pitchfork reviewed the track and gave it the Best New Music stamp, calling his falsetto angelic, and saying that the song shows off the kind of invention that lands a kid from Rayner's Lane in London with a record contract in the first place. But Jay was more than just a blog darling, even at this point. He was starting to appeal to his fellow artists. On May 20th, 2011, Drake dropped a Lucy on his blog called Dreams Money Can Buy, which prominently featured a sample of BTS To You looping in the background. It's Jay singing, "Don't fuck with me, don't fuck with me," which you can imagine why that makes an amazing rap sample. If you've never heard that song, you should check it out. Just a month later in June 2011, Beyonce sampled a cover of BTS To You by an artist named Nia on her song End of Time, which appeared on the album 4. There were more rave reviews coming in as well. His MySpace page featured a section called Inspirations that had pictures of Michael Jackson, Jay Dilla, and D'Angelo. So when BBC One's Zane Lowe said J. Paul was part Dilla, part D'Angelo, it surely made his day. While we would not get that rumored album in 2011 or even in 2012, Jay did continue to keep up his one song a year average by returning with the track Jasmine. The song is more traditionally R&B than BTS To You, with Jay's falsetto this time being a little more sultry. It features an awesome bass line and a great chord progression. It's an all-around incredible track, if not quite as genre-crushing as his debut song, but it definitely showed he had a lot of staying power. Pitchfork gave it Best New Music again, and the rest of the blogosphere ate it up as well. We'd get one more musical contribution from Jay in 2012, as he appeared on the deluxe version of former Outkast member Big Boy's album Vicious Lies and Dangerous Rumors on the song High Res with Little Dragon. He went from being sampled by legends to really making it into the studio with them in just a year. Everything was on the up and up for our guy Jay. Sure, he wasn't releasing a ton of music, but to anyone keeping score, he was clearly 2 for 2. He was moving at his own pace, and all signs pointed to an incredibly bright future. But unfortunately, that would all come crashing down in 2013. Early in the morning on April 13th, after not hearing anything from Jay or his label, a self-titled album appeared on a new Bandcamp page. The tracks were unnamed, and there were no posts about it from the label. Blogs started covering it, but quickly some were questioning whether or not it was an actual official release. And sure enough, a couple hours after the leak, Jay tweeted out an infamous statement, which actually was his first tweet ever. To confirm, demos on Bandcamp were not uploaded by me. This is not my debut album. Please don't buy. Statement to follow later. Thanks, Jay. 2 days later, XL Recordings followed up with their own statement. As widely reported, on Sunday, April 14th, music by XL Recordings artist J. Paul was illegally made available via a fake Bandcamp account. This music was not uploaded by Jay, and it's not his debut album. It is a collection of various unfinished recordings from Jay's past. Neither XL nor Jay will take any money from the sale of this music. We have been working with Bandcamp and PayPal to resolve this situation, and they have told us all purchases will be refunded within the next 7 days. Rumors spread that maybe he got his laptop stolen. Some even believed it was Jay himself who uploaded the album, either to spite the label or as some sort of publicity stunt. Just to get an idea of what the public reaction was like, here's an opinion piece in a blog called The Quietest from a few days after the fake debut album was released that uses the leak as a backdrop to clown on Jay and his music. They don't go as far as to claim that it was him who dropped it himself, but they leave the door open by calling his tweet deliberately ambiguous terms that would make a politician proud. They then accuse the leak and his discography in general as suffering from a lack of ideas, calling it incoherent, purposeless, and entirely uninteresting garage band pokes and prods. Let me tell you, that was not the prevailing reaction from most people about the album. The songs weren't mixed at all, really, or to the level that you would expect something on a label like XL Recordings to be putting out. Some sounded straight up unfinished or like missing parts, but that sure didn't stop people from loving it. As an unfinished, unmixed release, it placed 20th in Pitchfork's top 50 albums of 2013 and made a couple more year-end lists as well. I personally love this album. It leaked right at the end of my senior year of high school, and it was one of the most played projects in that era of my life. I remember I was going around to colleges and deciding which one I was going to go to. It's a pretty pivotal moment in my life, and it was soundtracked by this dude's unmixed, unreleased music. When I tried to play it around my friends, though, they were mostly like, "This sounds like ass," lacking the vocabulary to say that it just wasn't mixed right. I guess my destiny was always to be an obscure music YouTuber. In terms of what we heard from Jay after the leak, it was pretty much radio silence for years after that one tweet. But jumping a bit ahead, 6 years later, when he finally released the project onto streaming services, spoiler alert, as Leak 0413, Bait Ones, he put out a lengthy statement about what this period was like in his life. I'm gonna spread this statement out as we tell the story, but let's hear it right from him about how this may have happened and how it affected his life during this period. I wanted to use this opportunity to share a little information about what happened regarding my music in April 2013. As you know, some unfinished demos were put up for sale illegally via Bandcamp. The leak consisted of a fairly random collection of tracks I had made over quite a long period of time, from roughly 2007 to 2013, in various stages of completion. Some are short skits and beats from my MySpace page back in the day before I signed a record deal. A large proportion of this music was to be completed and released officially, in some format. Regarding how this music got leaked, the short answer is that I don't really know. I believe these particular versions of tracks may have come from a burned CD that got misplaced. A fair amount of people would have had access to my music in various forms between 2010 and 2013. The first I knew about the leak was when I woke up to a phone call from my management at around 3 a.m. on the night that it happened. I contacted the City of London police immediately. No one in my team knew how best to deal with something like this, and there was some confusion as to how we should react. I remember thinking if we could act fast, we might be able to contain it somewhat and keep damage to a minimum. However, because it was 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, it was tough to get a hold of anybody. Whoever was behind it likely planned it this way. For those who still weren't buying the story that the leak wasn't some masterminded strategy from Jay or his label, he went on to provide more context about how serious it was, including that the police got involved. A police investigation started during the summer. Email addresses from the Bandcamp page and a linked PayPal account led to 2 suspects who were eventually arrested, their property raided, and computers seized. Nothing was found, but by this time it was almost a year after the leak had taken place. The BPI kindly offered to step in and help towards the investigation, so I'd like to thank them for their concern. I'm grateful to the City of London Police for their efforts. Whoever was behind the leak collected a significant amount of money from sales, which was quickly frozen by the police. Thanks to cooperation from PayPal and Bandcamp, everyone who paid money to download the music was refunded. Jay was completely silent for a long while after the leak, and with a fandom who both cared about his work deeply and were also starved for information, any lead they could get was put under an intense microscope. His label XL Recordings in-house producer, Rudyard McDonald, sorry if I butchered that, I'm gonna be honest, did an interview with the magazine Dazed Digital in 2014, over a year after the leak, where they asked him basically what the hell Jay was up to. I did something with him last week. Some vocal production on a new song. We finished it. Whether he wants to put it out or not, I don't know. It's just a very long process for him, I guess. He's been working on his album for years. One of the things that I sort of identified was that he might benefit from some help using vocals. but his music sounds so good, he doesn't need any help. I think he's perfect. For as strong as the production was on the leaked version of Bait Ones, the vocals definitely did sound a little bit unproduced or unfinished. He acknowledged this much in the 2019 statement. Much of the tracking and production work was there, he said, but it's a shame about the scratch vocals and the overall mix. The thing with the music being unfinished is that, well, that made it a non-starter to listen to such unpolished work for more casual music fans, and I don't use that term with any disrespect intended. It was not a problem for a lot of musicians themselves. Going off my own experience, I listen to unmixed and unfinished music all the time. In fact, like 90% of what I've heard from myself is unmixed and unfinished. Like when I finish the song, I'm not really running it back once it comes out, but I spend a lot of time listening to my own unreleased and like thinking about it while I work on it, you know? And then I listen to a lot of my musician friends unreleased as well. Like I'm totally used to listening to unreleased music. And the majority of what I listen to is in the same like state of the process as the J. Paul leaked album. When we think about why so many artists gravitate towards J. Paul and why he is a godlike figure to fellow musicians, one of the reasons is that the barrier to entry is not blocked for crazy people like me and maybe you at home who can ignore the state of what's currently in front of us and use our imaginations to fill in all the spaces that the leak robbed Jay of having a chance to fill in himself. Another morsel of information that the J. Paul fandom immediately jumped on was when the R&B singer Miguel posted a picture of himself on Instagram standing with Jay and his brother AK in the studio in November 2014. This might not sound like a big deal on the outside. Wow, two artists post picture on Instagram in the studio. But in 2014, and regarding J. Paul, this was such a big deal. There was literally a Pitchfork article about it with the headline, "Elusive J. Paul surfaces on Miguel's Instagram." Even Mr. Mysterious himself, Frank Ocean, will get spotted on his bike in downtown Manhattan like 2 or 3 times a year. The funniest part about this picture is Jay's fingerprints weren't even the ones that ended up on the Miguel song. It was his brother AK, who ended up writing and producing on the song Flesh on Miguel's album Wild Heart. Great song, great album, by the way. The production kind of sounds like a more finished and realized version of what we heard on Bait Ones. That's probably because AK Paul was pretty heavily involved in the J. Paul album. He's an incredibly talented producer and writer and artist in his own right. And while Jay was suffering with the mental anguish of having his work taken from him, AK was able to stay active musically and start leaving his fingerprints on the pop and R&B scenes. In 2014, AK produced and sang on a track with London-based artist Now called So Good. There are Reddit threads from around then with people asking, wait, is that not Jay singing on the song? Because it sounded awesome, and it sounded like an extension of the world we were teased with in 2013. Now spoke on the Paul brothers. It's so funny that they're the Paul brothers, not those Paul brothers, like our Paul brothers, in an interview that she did with Rolling Stone in 2016. I get the impression from working with them, not that they're intentionally cagey, but that they're quite perfectionists with their music. Should I be reading all this in a British accent? I'm not going to do that, but it would be kind of funny. They spend a lot of time working on stuff, and they're okay with taking their time as well. They're not tapped into the industry in that way, and I don't know if they give a shit. They just make music, leave it for a few months, then come back to it and be like, I want to work on it some more. As a result, they only put out a few tracks. They're normal guys that are trying to find their own route without playing the game. They're just doing their thing and they're perfectionists. I know a lot of artists probably can totally relate to that. For example, I dropped a song in December 2023 called Fiji. I made that song in like January 2022. It was like almost 2 years old. And right before I put it out, I changed the entire bass line, I changed the entire second verse, and I changed the structure of the intro. And I added a whole bunch of ad-libs and all this shit. Because I just sat with it for like 2 years and was like, damn, you know what would make this better? And to be honest, I didn't have those ideas for like 18 months. So it's like sometimes you gotta live with it, sit with it, and just make it perfect. I totally relate to what they're saying. A lot of people struggled to understand what Jay was going through when his project leaked. And this context of understanding that he's a perfectionist could help with that understanding. He talked in the 2019 statement about just how hurtful the experience was for him. I understand that it might have seemed like a positive thing to a lot of people. The music they had been waiting to hear was finally out there, but for me, it was very difficult to deal with. As things unfolded, I went through a number of phases, but the immediate, overriding feeling was one of complete shock. I felt numb. I couldn't take it all in at first. I felt pretty alone with everything, like no one else seemed to view the situation in the same way that I did, as a catastrophe. There was a lot going through my mind, but the hardest thing to grasp was that I'd been denied the opportunity to finish my work and share it in its best possible form. I believe it's important for artists as creators to have some control over the way in which their work is presented, at a time that they consider it complete and ready. I was also frustrated by how this was being framed online, leading to the widespread belief that I had decided to leak my own music, despite my record label and I saying otherwise. It didn't fit at all with anything I had done previously in style or attitude, and especially not in presentation. To make matters worse, I was advised at the time to keep quiet and leave things ambiguous. But this didn't really fit with my vibe, and there was disagreement among us. I soon felt unable to engage with it at all. Just want to add in between reading the statement, we think about leaked music in 2024 and how much that's changed. People just paid $25,000 for an unreleased Kanye West song that has been floating on the internet for a long time. And it's there's this whole culture around leaked music now. Well, the J. Paul album was not the first album to ever leak or the first piece of music to end up on the internet that shouldn't have been there. That culture didn't really exist to that extent in 2013, I would say. Not to the level that it's at now, where there's 150 leaked Playboi Carti songs that everybody knows, and people go and throw it on Spotify and make money off of it. I did a whole video on that. But it's that didn't really exist, so I think it might have been harder for an artist to process that at that time, Okay, back to the statement. I suppose the music was special to me in a way. Stuff that I began writing as a teenager in my room just for fun, eventually signing my record deal with it at 21, and hoping that I could put it towards a debut album with XL. I guess having that dream torn up in front of me hit me pretty hard. Of course, I'm not the only person who was affected. It was disappointing to all who worked on the music, and to the wider team working on my project at my management, label, and publisher. There were some long-term effects for me following the leak. There was a significant loss of trust. For the next 3 years or so, this one event was all anybody asked me about. Everyone was convinced that the story they had read online, that I'd leaked the music myself, was true. So I had to repeatedly explain the reality of the situation over and over again. It was frustrating and disorienting to find that I had no ownership over the story or the music, and that people were choosing to believe a different truth. I guess this all made it feel like I had thousands of people not believing me, not trusting me, and also that, in some strange way, I was responsible for all of it. On a personal level, things gradually went south, and I had a breakdown of sorts. I was in quite a bad place for some time. I was unable to work and withdrew from life in general. So it is in this context that for years, from 2013 to 2016, we heard pretty much nothing from Jay. He was struggling in silence. There was the occasional spotting, including probably the funniest one in 2016, where a guy met Jay after a boiler room set in London and asked him to take a picture thinking that he was AK Paul, and Jay agreed and took the picture. And look at his face in the picture. And the comments are all just roasting the guy who posted it, dude, you just met Jay. And they're also oh my god, he's alive. But he was such a mythical figure in that period that it was probably hard to imagine just seeing him in the flesh. That year in 2016, Jay took the smallest little step back into the public eye when he and his brother announced something called the Paul Institute. At first, they just posted a website that asked for people's phone numbers. Without any real context, people weren't really sure what this was. 3 days later, a new AK Paul song called Land Cruisin' was premiered on BBC Radio 1 with Zane Lowe. They sent out a press release along with it, saying that they were inviting new alliances with like-minded individuals to help explore, learn, and share ideas in music and beyond, without forgetting a trademark sense of fun along the way. People may not have fully understood what the Paul Institute was at first, and in the moment there was probably some disappointment that there was no J music to go along with the announcement. But as a song, Land Cruisin' is an absolute smacker. The beginning sounds like some damn sci-fi movie and then it drops in with super funky guitar riffs, loud percussion, and beautiful harmonies. I just want to say this video is titled J. Paul, but AK Paul, man, fire as well. Huge part of the story. Doesn't exist without him. Just like all the official releases from the Paul Institute so far, the song got Pitchfork's coveted Best New Music sticker. Later that year, Now and AK Paul collaborated again on the song Trophy, and AK produced a remix of James Vincent McMorrow's song Rising Water. Well, 3 official songs in 1 year isn't exactly like Lil B or RX Nephew levels of prolificness. That was a personal record for the Paul brothers at that point. In 2017, AK secured another big look with his feature on Muramasa's debut album, on the track Who Is It Gonna Be? In addition, the singer Hira released their first single, Eve, which featured production from AK as well. We'll see more from Hira in a little bit. Before then, though, an article dropped in late 2017 announcing that the Paul Institute had purchased a space that used to be a discotheque for the staff of the BBC, which is a thing that I never would have guessed existed, but sounds kind of cool, to be a 3,000 square foot creative space for their artists. In 2019, it was revealed in an article by Design Curial that the space ended up not being used by the Paul Institute. As it says, the brothers eventually decided to base their studios elsewhere. There are rumblings about some legal issues that had to do with it, but it's not really relevant to the video. We still got this pic of Jay and AK in hard hats, which led to a lot of memes along the lines of this dude quit music to become a construction worker. That wasn't really the case though. Just like his brother, Jay had actually been putting in work into developing other artists. In late 2017, we got the first single from Paul Institute signee Fabiana Palladino, which featured writing and production credits from Jay. Jay had found her on the internet on SoundCloud in 2013 or 2014 and emailed her to meet up, which led to a decade ongoing of collaborative work. Fast forward to 2024 and Fabiana just released her debut album. It was a long time in the making, clearly, and Jay appears on the credits as a writer or a producer on every single song except for the last one. He's also a feature on vocals on the track I Care, which is one of my favorite songs this year so far. Fabiana is an incredible producer in her own right, and she has credits on every song. But it's cool to see Jay helping another artist with their vision. He actually spoke in the long 2019 statement about how impactful the Paul Institute had been for breaking him out of that spell that he had previously spoken about. Founding the Paul Institute has also been an important step for me in terms of putting stuff out there again and getting back to what I love. I wanted to create a positive environment that artists could be supported in and stand together through some of the pressures that can make this industry difficult to navigate. I'm proud of what we've achieved so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing our artists develop. In addition to Fabiana, the London-based artist Ruthven joined the Institute in 2017 with his single Evil, and then followed it up with Hypothalamus in 2018. Both were produced by AK Paul. Two more artists joined right after, the aforementioned Hira and the singer Rainan. Rainan's first single was produced by AK, while Hira's was self-produced, but he and AK had already worked together. In 2019, Jay made his big return with The Statement and the availability of Bait Ones on streaming services, in addition to a brand new website with a bunch of merch and vinyl for sale. Most importantly, he talked about how his mental health had improved after those 6 years of struggling. Recently, I've been having therapy of various kinds, and this has helped me get to a place where I can begin to think about returning to music. I'm thankful for that. It has allowed me to understand some of what happened in 2013 a little better. Not through anybody else's lens, but through my own. And through this, I've been able to acknowledge some of the trauma and grief. I've grown to appreciate that people have enjoyed that music and lived with it. And I accept that there is no way to put that shit back in the box. There was no way to fix what happened and continue down our original path. Looking back, it's sad to think about what could have been, but it is what it is, and I had to let go. The version of Bait Ones that we got on streaming services wasn't the exact same due to sample clearances and whatnot, but I don't think it affected the listening experience to the point where somebody needs to download that original leak and compare it. Now seems like the best time for me to talk about the actual music. Straight Out of Mumbai is one of the coolest songs ever made, unfinished or not, I don't even care. Imagining what it could sound like if it was truly fleshed out, it would be up there in the canon of those really important indie pop tracks of the 2010s, the MGMT, levels of anthemic, shutting down Urban Outfitters, but still really quality and important. One of the songs that you'd burn onto a CD to tell somebody what 2011 felt like. But on top of that, it has this distinctly Indian flavor from some of the percussion and this random vocal sample that they cut into there from the singer Vani Jairam. The song Zion Wolf has a very 80s feel to it, and actually the first time I started to try to produce a song myself that was not kind of rap based, I ripped the chords from that song. It didn't sound as cool as Zion Wolf did, even if that song is unfinished. Genevieve and 100,000 are a little more upbeat with crazy falsetto on certain parts, and on 100,000 you can hear that influence on that SoundCloud producer generation that came after it. Kind of the same way with BTS-TU. The bounce and the sample choices and the drums and the random whoops in the background, all that stuff is just very, very influential. The song Crush, which is a cover of Jennifer Page's hit 90s song, has a completely different feel than the original, and since I had low-key never heard the original before I listened to the J. Paul song 100 times, I didn't really know it was a cover.
If I haven't seen it, it's new to me.
It feels like the original to me, not that that means anything, but like I just know that version way better, and it's such a good hook. I can't give Jay credit to writing it, but he really picked a good song to reimagine. I think that was my favorite song when I first heard the project, but Straight Outta Mumbai has probably overtaken it by now. At the end of the track list, Chicks and All Night are two of the strongest songs on here. And with one of the artists from this series that I've already covered, McGee, I think you can hear direct influence in a song like All Night. It's smooth, forward-thinking R&B, and it inspired a whole generation of artists in that pocket. Listening to these songs, even if they're still enjoyable in their current form, comes with the pain of accepting that we'll never really get to know what Jay wanted to do with them. He acknowledged that himself. It's a shame to not be able to present something completed in its entirety. It'll always be a little painful for me to listen to myself, but I don't want to deny people a chance to hear it, especially as it's already knocking about. Hopefully, this message gives it all a bit of context and answers a few questions about it. He didn't just give us bait ones though. He also gave us two fully completed tracks from around the same time, He and Do You Love Her Now. These songs are great in their own right, but they also provide an idea for what finished songs on Bait Ones would have probably sounded like. The re-release kind of overshadowed these songs for me when they first came out, just because I was so excited to revisit a project, but they're awesome too, and I've been going back to them a lot as I worked on this video. Fabiana Palladino has a writing credit on He, which to me is probably my favorite of the two, showing that he and the Institute were meshing well creatively, if you couldn't already tell. Both of these songs were given Best New Music status by Pitchfork, but you probably could have guessed that at this point. They gotta rename that site Paul Fork. Am I right? Now back in the limelight, Jay developed an unlikely and multifaceted relationship with fellow creative Donald Glover. He appeared in the production credits on the song Time on the 2020 album 31520, which has since been reissued as Atta Vista, and that song is still on there. When the song was first released, producer DJ Dahi told GQ about Jay's involvement. Yeah, he was actually one of the mixers on the record. He really helped us get the mix of the records to sound the way it was. And it's because he had some very unique ways of looking at the song, and he just loved it. So yeah, he contributed really just helping the sound of the record for sure. We're both big fans of his work, of what he does, his sound, his choices, and things. He's definitely one of my inspirations, in just the way he hears music and sounds and beats. And so yeah, I've always been a huge fan of his. Another guy on the board for J. Paul inspirations. In addition, he appears in an episode of Atlanta, having a conversation with the character Darius, played by Lakeith Stanfield, also known as the guy who got Dijon to not be a rapper and become an R&B singer. If you want to know more about that, watch my video on Dijon. In 2021, for the 10-year anniversary of BTS-TU, he remade his infamous MySpace page as an interactive site full of Easter eggs and bonuses. But nothing in his return would compare to the surprise of the Coachella performance. I was already planning on going as a Frank Ocean stan, but when I found out I'd get to see Jay's first performance too, I was probably just as geeked for that. Jay was great, especially when you consider that it was his first show ever. I didn't take any videos because I was too locked in, but I have this one pic from when they were still setting up. It was kind of funny because his set conflicted with this other band I love, Sunset Roller Coaster. But I was like, come on man, when am I ever gonna get a chance to see J. Paul again? And of course, like a day or two later, they announced that they were doing 2 shows in New York, and they had a lottery for the tickets, and I couldn't believe, but I actually won. So like 2 weeks later, I went and I saw almost the exact same set again, not that I'm complaining. But he seemed way looser and more comfortable the second time. The sound was a little better at Coachella, but Knockdown Center, the venue that he played at in New York, is kind of infamous for the sound being hit or miss. So I'm not putting that on Jay or like inexperience or anything like that. Some might have expected to hear some new music after that, but besides 1 or 2 things that he teased during the live set, we haven't gotten anything besides the Fabiana album. I wouldn't close the door on it, but if there's anything I can say from following J. Paul for over a decade, it's gonna come whenever he feels like it. But that's one of the reasons why artists love him so much. I think J. Paul may be one of the most fundamentally misunderstood artists of our time. A big part of that is the leak and the misgivings that a lot of the music community had about its origins. But even before the leak, Jay had gained the reputation of a recluse, someone who took his time on things. Around the same time as his rise, we saw The Weeknd come into the limelight, and he did so in this like kind of pseudo-anonymous way. There weren't a lot of pictures of him, and he wasn't giving all these interviews, getting on the internet and talking into his camera. He gained the reputation of mysterious, and that mystique became the driving force that kind of pushed him to be the pop star that he was, kind of blossoming and slowly coming more and more into the limelight until the point that he was literally playing the Super Bowl. The tag mysterious is kind of a running joke with like internet music fans, especially after DJ Khaled's rant when Tyler the Creator's album Igor outsold his album Father of Assad back in 2019. Many artists in the 2010s, especially after the success of The Weeknd, tried the whole anonymous or mysterious thing as a marketing tactic. J. Paul was someone who was often put in this box, but I don't think it's ever been for the sake of marketing. I think Jay is just a dude who takes his time crafting his sound and really cares about perfecting stuff. And as artists, when we hear music and we recognize game, it can go from being an annoying marketing tactic to a signifier of the amount of respect that is put into the work. And when you listen to the work that we have gotten from Jay, I feel like it's obvious that respect is there, even if the music's not really for you. The tale of J. Paul can be interpreted in a few different ways. It's the story of a true genius, with the way his mostly unfinished work has people still ranting and raving about it a decade later, even showing up to fill out concert venues on a whim. It's a tragedy too, in the sense that when you hear that leaked music, you have no choice but to fill in those blanks yourself and imagine what it would sound like if he got the chance to finish it. It's a redemption story too, and how Jay managed to pull himself out of a deep depression and rebound to the point where he was performing in front of us at Coachella for the first time, and putting a lot of work into other amazing artists like Fabiana Palladino. But most of all, I don't think any story being told about music production and composition in the 2010s and 2020s can be told without visiting the world of Jay. His fingerprints are all over the work of today's leading producers and artists. Once a best-kept secret, floating on an internet island away from the DSPs, and meant for people who were either around for it, in the know, or just curious enough to find something like that. Now the work is there for everyone to enjoy it for what it is. A French painter named Paul Cézanne is regarded as one of the fathers of modern art. A part of his signature style was to leave certain parts of the canvas blank while he was painting. People often debate, did he do this on purpose, or did he just not get around to finishing it? Regardless of the intent, people have flocked to art museums to see his work for over a century. J. Paul's Bait Ones is basically a Cézanne. We'll never really know exactly how he intended to fill those spaces, or which spaces he may have intended to leave open. All we have is what we have, and all you can do is take it for what it is.